This is the Thursday morning edition of Severe Thunderstorm Outlooks. A lot to go over here, so pay attention, especially if you live in the Central Plains and increasingly east of there toward the Mississippi River toward Monday. The Storm Prediction Center has adjusted and increased a lot of their outlooks, especially over the weekend and into Monday. There's a pretty significant threat today in Kansas and parts of Oklahoma, maybe going up into Minnesota. I'm meteorologist Ted Keller. Let's dive into the details. We have a lot to unpack. Let's start with today. The Storm Prediction Center has leveled out an enhanced area here in eastern Kansas. This is an upgrade that they said they might make on yesterday's discussions, and certainly they did. So that's a 3 out of 5 chance of any type of severe weather. And there's a large area of level 1 that runs from almost the Canadian border down into South Texas and includes much of Illinois, almost all of Wisconsin, a little sliver of northwest Arkansas, much of Missouri. So obviously thunderstorms are expected to develop generally in this area here and then advance through this region with the highest probability of supercells and severe weather right there. If we take a look at the tornado risk here, it is a 2% broad brush. Again, the percentages mean chance of any tornado within a 25-mile circle of wherever you pick. So it goes from 2 to 5 from southwest Iowa to northern Oklahoma, and then a 10% risk in a little more of a narrow area that basically is right around the Wichita area and then points east. But we can zoom in on that. Take a look at, I kept the colors for the percentages and added a little bit of a clarification now that the Storm Prediction Center has issued this spring. It's a new thing where they go tornado intensities, and there are 3 levels of this. This is just level 1 that they've issued so far, so it weighs very heavily on the EF0 and EF1 scale. Not saying that these higher tornadoes are not possible, but almost 80% of the probability of tornado intensities in those 2 levels is caught up there, and that goes in that striped area. So the thing that they did, and this is interesting and important, is that they said, there's not necessarily as strong of a correlation anymore between the tornado intensity and the percentage chance of any tornado. So in other words, they're speaking now to these areas that don't have the higher percentages, but you're wondering how intense a tornado would be if it were in that area, if that makes sense. So anyway, but the highest probabilities of probably an EF0 or an EF1 would be in that yellow area right there. And also we'll zoom back out. There's a pretty good hail risk. Some guidance puts it a little bit higher, but 30% chance. Severe hail is 1 inch in diameter or greater, and I think there's a high probability of 2-inch diameter in some of those storms. The wind risk is a little bit more subtle and spread out a little bit. This is a 15% chance. This entire thing is expected to line out and kind of sag like that as we get into the overnight hours. And now CSU's, Colorado State University's learning machine, puts the tornado probability right on the Oklahoma-Kansas border at 10%. And so not as far north as SPC's, but they're high hail risk based on past performances of data that looked like this is 45% right there to the southeast of Wichita, getting into northern Oklahoma, really close to the I-35 corridor there. And the wind risk, like the SPCs, is a little more broad brush, not the highest possibility. Tornado and hail win today on this one. And here's Nadocast. I was saying here, but this is a 15% chance of a tornado from Wichita southward along I-35, roughly. And then they have a hatched area of their own. It's a separate type of forecast, but it's a 10% chance of an EF2 or greater. So they're putting the probabilities a little bit higher than the one I showed you from SPC. And of course, SPC updates that outlook, as I say, often. So they'll do one, I believe their update is at 11:30 Central. So if you're in those areas, be watching for updates. So this is a quick look at the meteorology here. As far as the 500 millibar flow is concerned, big cutoff system here, and it's what's keeping the northern U.S. cool. It's also keeping the cold fronts kind of wrapping around this feature and not really diving that far south. So this stream, as you'll see in subsequent outlooks here, is very important. This part of the jet stream is going to be very active. So this is how it'll look at 7 p.m. with the bulk shear about an hour before that, again, roughly. And if it's purple, there's enough shear from the surface to this level to support supercells. And the supercell, of course, is the holy grail of getting severe weather to develop. You can get it in other ways, but if you get a supercell, it lasts longer, it doesn't choke itself off, it has a better chance of producing all 3 of the severe weather categories, which of course would be a tornado, but also large hail and damaging winds. Here's a look at the Cape. Pretty unstable through this period here. This is really ongoing convection that has kind of leveled that out. That's what that little white bubble is right there. And also very unstable air right down ahead of the dry line. There are some capping issues. especially uncertain from northern Oklahoma southward. If something were to pop, it would be a very good environment. That they're thinking, and I'm thinking too, that the best chances are a little bit more to the north, where the cap is maybe a little bit weaker, and there might be a little disturbance in the dry line there, a little low pressure area, a little kink, which is interesting for chasers mostly, but it does pop up around, let's say, Wichita and that general area. Here's a look at some radars. Again, grain of salt with exact placement by hour here. They could be off a county or two, or not pick up on something, but this is 2 o'clock. The activity starts early north of Omaha up into Minnesota, and then at 3 o'clock, that probably should have been 1 o'clock, that last graph. The activity is moving a little bit, some activity popping up in northern Missouri. That should not be severe. And then it starts to grow and expand, and it's these southern cells here that I worry about being they'll eventually go linear, but some of these are going to be isolated, and probably the best supercells and the best severe weather producers. And at 7 o'clock, this lines out a little bit, but I think it shifts a little bit more to the south and east, and eventually that will all get gathered up in a line too, as you can see here. But some of these, at least according to the latest run of HRRR, are maintaining their integrity a little bit, even to 9 o'clock tonight, which is a legitimate tornado risk just to the southeast of Wichita, because the low-level winds are really expected to kick in tonight and do a favorable profile for that area, which so often happens in the Great Plains. So it's an area to watch here, even after dark, for sure. Okay, now we'll go ahead to Friday. This is not the most intense of all the days, but it is something notable. So southern Missouri is in a level 1, and then a level 2 includes most of Arkansas, Little Rock, the corner of northeast Texas, northern Louisiana, over to Jackson, Mississippi later on in the evening. Tornado risk is a little bit more subdued, only a 2% chance in this area here. And if you look at Colorado State universities, they agree with that 2% assessment. Hail is definitely a higher risk, wind not so much. And that is typically a spread in the summer, by the way. Wind becomes much more of a deal when we start getting into, spring. Wind becomes much more of a deal when we start getting into June and July patterns. Here's the 500 millibar flow for Friday, so a little more subdued, but still evidence of a little jet stream here, maybe a couple little kinks in the flow. This thing is cut off, like I said, allowing this stream to really be active. And there's lots of wind coming ashore down there, and we'll get into that here right now as we look at Saturdays. Now, this is, again, kind of the prelude for the next 2 days after it. So Saturday has a level 3, which is pretty intense for being 3 days out, from Wichita down to Tulsa, basically, and maybe a little corner of northwest Arkansas with a level 2 getting into southwest Missouri. All of southwest Missouri has some risk, as does northwest Arkansas, and so it's a pretty extensive area. This is expected to be thunderstorms that form along a warm frontal boundary, and that will kind of either do this or cluster up together. So a big hail producer also, and not so much tornadoes maybe, but we'll have to watch it. So on Saturday, they do put a tornado risk in eastern Oklahoma mostly, but it does leak into parts of Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, and Texas too. The hail risk is very large on Saturday for Oklahoma for sure, with the wind risk, again, a little more subdued, but certainly not to be ignored either. Saturday's flow features a strong level coming ashore in Baja and California. We're kind of in a pattern here where we have sufficient flow aloft. It's maybe not the main game, but it's coming in for Saturday for sure. Now, Sunday, big chance here. This is expanded a little bit. Now, the other day, they raised this to a 30% from southeastern Kansas, straight down from I-35, basically eastward in Oklahoma is under a high risk for severe weather. 30% chance within 25 miles of any type of severe weather on Sunday. I did want to show you what the CSU is doing here with Sunday's risk. This is extremely important. This is a hatched area, so this is a high probability of high-end severe weather and a 45% chance of any severe weather. And this one shifted a little more east, suggesting, I think, that SPC's outlook here is good for the early part of the day. This particular output has more confidence, I think, as these storms organize and move east. That would be my interpretation of that. And by Sunday, that wind energy really comes out into the plains. This looks more like a classic dry line setup, and a big day possibly for Oklahoma, Kansas, northern Texas, and then for points east later on that day. Now, Monday has shifted significantly. Monday not only has increased to 30% chance, but they were definitely targeting this area more just yesterday and even the day before. And now much of Missouri is under this 30% risk, as is southern Illinois for Monday. So this is a pretty significant change, and it does actually weigh a little bit differently. Now, CSU is still hanging on to the old solution. But again, I would interpret that as a late development in the day. So you compare this to that, and they are just moving that a lot more to the north, that kind of reddish area there. So that's a pretty significant change, and even if you take the average between those two, it's clear that eastern Missouri, eastern Arkansas, points east and southeast are going to be under the gun on Monday as the jet stream continues. One little wave that kind of moves on through. There's still energy in this thing, enough so that on Tuesday, even though a more stable air mass sinks in here, there is some risk still in Louisiana and Mississippi, and the flow at that point kind of becomes a little more zonal. So that's all it's going to do to push that next shot of cool air in. And there's still some energy in the southwest. In fact, on Wednesday, there's still a little bubble of severe weather probability right where Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and Louisiana meet. And then finally, we'll take a look at the NIU probabilities. That sums up the next 7 days and does so very well. But this one, the 30th through May 6th, again, you can see the influence of a little bit more of a stable, cooler high move its way in, but it's a sharp cutoff point because the probabilities for supercells are pretty high still in Oklahoma, Texas, and then stretching along that front to the east. Again, these are averages over a week, so it's hard to diagnose the position on any given day of a front. This is just the average. And then the week after that, a little bit of recovery, still some stable air in the northern plains. They've already had a lot of tornadoes in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois. They don't need any more, so they're going to stabilize out quite a bit. But the traditional areas where you expect tornadoes in early May are highlighted for sure. Thanks for watching today's edition of Severe Thunderstorm Outlooks. This is published every day after the morning Storm Prediction Center update. Also, remember to check that site often day one because they update it fairly frequently. If you like this video, please like it. Also, you can subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.